got our participants rolling in. First of all, thank you for attending. Take time out of your day. This is the CMMC webinar coalition webinar series. I've got three excited guests, three CEOs of GRC companies that are here to share their knowledge in the industry, and I want to introduce them going around the horn. Mark Berman is the CEO of FutureFeed, Robert Hill is the CEO of Saturus, and Ozzie Saeed is the CEO of IntelliGRC. I'm Brian Rhodes with iFortress. We are an MSSP and a compliance consultant service as well. I'll let these gentlemen introduce themselves around the horn here. Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. Thanks very much, Brian, and thanks for hosting us and this opportunity today to speak about GRC tools, which I know, speaking for the people on this call, we love. The rest of you, we'll have to convert you over time. So FutureFeed was a company that I started in 2019, but it actually was born out of an effort we made in credit unions starting in 2015. We found that credit union compliance was very arduously implemented by the NCUA, and we tried to do something about it. When we found that there was such a need in the DoD supply chain to do better, all of us do better, I decided to kind of split off from the MSP that I had at that time, where I started developing the product and built it out into the FutureFeed that it is today to address this problem that we have as a nation. And I'm glad to see that we have so many people that are also in the industry, so there's choice all around.
Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Brian. I'm Robert Hill, folks, CEO of Saturus. And similar to what Mark was saying, our Saturus grew out of exactly the need, but ours was slightly different. We were a consulting company. We were, 30 years of experience recognizing we had the same pain points that all of our clients had. The ability to agnostically manage global compliance. And that doesn't matter where you're located or what that compliance is, or even what industry or vertical you're in. You have the same problems that the neighbors do. And we were having an issue managing iterations, managing various compliance, managing all the different clients in the iterations of those compliances in spreadsheets. And there were hundreds of spreadsheets people were trying to manage. And so we developed an internal tool so that we could manage our clients and their compliance. And eventually that tool, very similar to Mark, starting in 2015 and in 2019, we started getting external clients. And then we really launched the tool as a way for consulting companies and the end users to manage a plethora of compliance, risk management, vendor risk management, third-party supply chain management, policy management, all of the things that take so much bandwidth and time. And as Mark was saying, guys, for you on the call, it's arduous for you to manage this manually. And I can say, pick a tool. There's a lot of tools on the market, but pick something that gives you efficiency and helps you with your reporting so that you understand real time where you are and you're not doing something once a year and trying to make decisions based in the rearview mirror on what you were told 10, 11 months ago, waiting on that next assessment. It has to be real time, and that knowledge, that data has to come to the decision makers within your organizations so that you can manage your decision making from a place of knowledge. Ozzie, over to you, sir.
Over to you, Ozzie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining, and thanks, Brian and team at iFortress for putting this together. So my name's Ozzie. My background was actually primarily in an engineering focus, so systems engineering, a lot of solutions architecting work around the DoD and other federal agencies. I've done some work with GSA and DHS as well. And then I want to say earlier on in my career, a quarter way into my career, I switched over to an IA role. This was around the time DIACAP and DITSCAP was migrating to NIST RMF in the federal government. And so I became an ISSO, an Information System Security Officer, did a lot of that work, got involved in like several ATO projects across the DoD, DHS, and GSA. And then in 2015, out of the pain that I experienced in using the federal GRC products, I had decided that, the company that I was working for at the time needed NIST 800-171. It came up on our radar in 2015. And I said, I'd rather build something that'll help me try to streamline and automate aspects of evidence collection. And so I started development of IntelliGRC as an internal tool. And then we pivoted to a services company where we were tech-enabled services. And then I want to say in 2022, we launched IntelliGRC as a SaaS product. And so here we are today.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks again, gentlemen, for being here and participating in this panel. For the people that came in or have been kind of trickling in, welcome to the CMMC Coalition webinar series. This is designed to be interactive. You can get some questions answered, to get some knowledge from these gentlemen who are experts in their industry and their space. Again, I'm Brian Rhodes with iFortress, and we welcome everyone to the big show. First off, I want to point out that we've put out a baseline poll. You can answer those questions at your leisure as we go through this discussion. And then you're also welcome to, in the Q&A section of the of this webinar, to put in questions real time so that we can try to address them. And at the end of this, we're going to wrap up with a few spare minutes, and we're going to do screenshots of any questions we're not able to get to. We're going to take this recording and we're going to answer those questions. The panelists are going to go ahead and answer any remaining questions and get them back to you as quickly as we can, probably the next 2 to 3 business days. And that's the goal for today. So again, thank you for being here. And I want to start out with a nice friendly question to the group. I want everybody to chime in here. First thing up here is curious, what is your advice to MSPs and maybe even OSCs, organizations seeking certification, supporting the DIB customers in the context of the CMMC ecosystem? I'm going to open that up first to left to right. Mark?
My advice is not to think too short term. So I probably have loads of advice because I think about this stuff all the time. That said, a lot of people, when they see the challenge that's put in front of them as a contractor in DoD, they're looking at, how do I get to 110 and how do I do it immediately? But it's a 3-year never-ending assessment cycle. And so if you look at it too short term, what happens is you may be able to prove your compliance right now, and since there's a lag there's always a lag, so you'll be able to prove that you were compliant 3 months ago by the time you actually get assessed. But then things change because this is technology. Like, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, Brian, or anybody else. So when you're looking for a solution, you need to be thinking long-term. Think about the 3-year assessment cycle. And what's different about this compliance, if you haven't already started or you're not all the way in the middle of it, is up until really CMMC, compliance meant filling out a spreadsheet with a lot of checks and X's to figure out where you stood at a period of time. This is an evidence-based assessment. So you're not going to get away with just checking a box on some control and saying, we do this, and then waiting until the assessor comes in to explain to them how you do it. You have to get that all done in advance. You have to have a place to organize all the information. I think that 320 objectives is a lot of objectives, and I can't maintain that in my head. And in a spreadsheet, I can't really find line number 227 and remember what that one is very easily. So that was part of why we wanted to create Future Feed. So I guess my 2 points of advice are, you're going to have a lot of data, and that data kind of interacts with each other as you record it, and it's evidence-based. And then you don't want to create a situation where you have to start over again. There's an annual self-reassessment where a senior level manager has to sign off that you've looked at all those controls and objectives again. You don't want to be in a situation where you are just either blowing off that signature, and actually there's a big price to pay if it turns out that you weren't telling the truth, or that you're not ready, and the huge effort that it is the first time. That's fine. Anybody can deal with a one-time huge effort. But if you have to do that every year, that's when you have to start hiring actual people to sit in chairs, and that's a lot more expensive than doing it right the first time. So a little bit rambling, but those are my 2 major pieces of initial advice.
Well, let's go to you, Ozzie. You got anything to add there? It's no shame if he stole all your thunder, but we want everybody to have an opportunity to respond.
Sure. Yeah, no. So I do think MSPs have a tremendous opportunity, right? This is a huge opportunity for their business. So if you're an MSP, what other requirements around information technology and security exist that's enforced by the government, right? There's HIPAA, but there's no third-party aspect to it, right? And then you have industry-recognized accreditations like ISO and SOC 2, but CMMC is enforced, right? So this is a huge market opportunity that if I were an MSP, my advice to you would be, if you have customers in the defense industrial base, look into implementing CMMC for yourself, even getting certified on your roadmap, because, you know, what better way to drop a sales barrier than saying, I'm also certified, I can help you get there, right? And then I would definitely look into developing processes and solutions around how you can tackle the market to support DIB companies, because I'll tell you this much. The majority of the SMB to mid-size DIB companies I've come across over the years, they all need help. They're going to need an MSP or an MSSP. They're going to need somebody to do their hand-holding, their continuous monitoring, their patching, their vuln management. And so this is a huge reoccurring revenue model that MSPs should start preparing for tackling if they aren't already. That's my advice.
Excellent. Excellent. Robert?
I'm going to go a little different direction, and it's kind of tying into what Mark and Ozzie have both said. It is a new compliance. It's a paradigm shift. We're now dealing with continual compliance, not once a year compliance. We're dealing with resiliency built into the organization, not just a check the box, as you articulated, Brian. But it's more than that. It's being able to attest to that. And, you know, both Mark and Ozzie talked about this, you know, being evidentiary evidence that has to be presented. But it's more than that. You have to maintain the documentation with your SSP of not only how you're doing it now, but how you're going to maintain that into the future, into the 3 years. And I think that is something that so many of the OSCs are missing, is this. Okay, it's fine to talk about how you historically have done it. It's fine to talk about how you're doing it now. But don't forget that you have to show and attest of how you're going to do that for that 3 years to maintain that level of resiliency, that level of compliance. And if you don't have a plan in place to do that long term, if you don't have a plan in place so that, you know, working with so many C3PAOs, one of the big things they're finding is the documentation doesn't match the reality of the infrastructure. And as Mark correctly articulated, this is IT. We change regularly. The problem is the documentation is not keeping up with the changes in the environment. And so that's a failure. If the C3PO and those auditors, or the assessors, excuse me, different industry, if the assessors can't see how you are doing that and maintaining that, and the documentation they're looking at differs from your reality as is built, that's a real problem. And so my advice is put together a process by which you have in place processes that align your documentation, your inventory, your policies, your procedures, and all of the activities that let the assessors know how you're doing it and how you're maintaining that to align with your as-is and your technical folks that are making changes in your environment. And for many businesses, Brian, that is a paradigm shift, because documentation was always something that they did after the fact if they got around to it. And we can't do that anymore.
Yeah, to that point, you know, that's why this is educational. It's so important that we get this information to the right people, because one of the things I've seen in my years of business and audits and things of that nature, ISO 9000 or 2700 or whatever audit, typically they know it's coming. They prep for about a month or a week or a few days or whatever it's necessary. They pull out the old one. Where were we at last year? They dust it off, and then they meet the compliance requirements and they put it away. And it doesn't really affect their workflow or their behavior or their habits. And that's the thing that people need to understand about CMMC as a solution. It's meant to be an ongoing, living, breathing solution that has to be implemented throughout the calendar year. And while there are 3-year audits, it's definitely has to be consistent over year. And you three gentlemen provide tools and solutions that allows people to not only prove their experiences and what they've done in the past, and as you said, in the present, but it gives them a tool that they can continuously implement and hold themselves accountable, and also have the evidentiary information necessary to prove that they're doing it the right way. If a spot audit is hit, a 5-day audit, or anything else that might come along their way. So it's real important that we emphasize that these tools are designed to make their lives easier, I think. Unless somebody else to add, I'm going to move to a few questions.
I'd like to add something.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I actually misheard the question. I answered from the perspective of the small business as opposed to the MSP, but there's a couple things I'd love to add for the MSP that didn't get covered. One of them is the shared responsibility matrix. So as an MSP, you've always had your contract, and if you're an MSP on this call, you've always been able to look at your contract when it's between you and the client and look at what you're responsible for. And unfortunately, from the client point of view, they bury that contract until something breaks. And more often than not, the thing that breaks was out of scope with your contract. And that's how people actually change MSPs over time. The reality is this CMMC effort shines a spotlight on who's responsible for what. So you now have an opportunity to bring on a regular basis, front and center, who's responsible, who's accountable for each thing. So as part of this effort, you should, as an MSP, make some effort to describe to your clients exactly which controls or which objectives you're responsible for and which ones they're responsible for and which ones are somewhere in between. That is obviously going to help with compliance, but the subtle part of it is actually going to help you keep your clients because you're going to have less misunderstandings about who's in charge of what. And so I think that there are some side benefits from this whole process, and that's one of them right there.
Very true. Very true. So listen, gentlemen, we've got some participation from the audience here. I wanted to get to this fun one. The first one is we could ask about GRC platform is the best, but more importantly, I would prefer a poll on the best looking beard. I don't know if I can do that on the fly. But
hands down, Robert.
I appreciate that. We're going to vote Robert, I think, but thank you, Terry, for breaking the ice there. But on a serious note, we've got what I think is a little bit of a complex question. I think it'll be good for everybody to tear into here. Coming from a government contractor and now working for a law firm, we have an understanding of where CMMC affects us. However, several of our customers are government contractors. We do not handle their CUI, but help them with various intellectual property needs, labor and employment, and others. With the flow down clause in CMMC, where does this line stop? Could outside legal counsel, even without system interconnections, be forced to comply with CMMC? I can take a little bit of that. You really got to be careful about your scope and your interacting and the connectivity that you have in networking and communications as a law firm. I would urge you, if you don't have the on-staff expertise to understand CMMC and compliance and the DFARS clauses and all the things that roll down like a DFARS 7012 clause that makes you kind of accountable as a subcontractor to the prime, there's things like that that can bleed over, and it would really, I would strongly suggest you seek expert consulting services out there in the marketplace. But I'm going to let these gentlemen take a swing at it. If anybody's got a urge, just put your hand up so I know who to go to first. All right, Robert's ready to go.
Yeah, and I think that is a loaded question, and it's not got just a simple answer.
No,
if you're a law firm and you're doing contractual law for the OSC, and that contract from the DoD includes a 7012 clause, and it includes the potential, whether it be diagrams, architecture, that could be considered CUI, and you pass that to your law firm, and that law firm reviews that, and they have stored that on their local machines, and it has been branded as containing CUI, by sending it to them, you have now put them into your scope. So that's on you, not on the law firm. And so you have to have these contingencies and understand what your position is. If you want them to review, do you strip certain sections out? Are there only certain business sections you use? You as an organization have to determine your impact liability and how you are going to engage with your subcontractors to either have them in scope or specifically out of scope based on the decisions in your processes you put in place.
Right. You're answering the question as it was posed as the person with the CUI, but the front end of that was leaving a government contractor and now working for a law firm. I think this person represents the law firm and is concerned about what their liability is and does it flow down to them. So I think
they have to be careful with it.
Yeah, your answer is accurate, but I think it goes back to you've got to seek serious expert help to make sure that you don't get yourself in a bad situation, because it can get really tricky and sticky, especially with federal contract information. If it's FCI, that's kind of entry-level CUI, but it's actually a specific thing. If it's in the contract and it's exposed and you're getting that information and it's supposed to be protected, then you do have the liability of the CMMC flow-down clauses. Go ahead, Mark.
I would just add to that that's what these controls are designed for. So you shouldn't, if you're the law firm, you're not an authorized holder of the CUI. You can't store, process, or transmit it. If you add up the sum and total of all the controls, this is not a cybersecurity framework. It's a protect the CUI framework. So
exactly.
if you're a law firm that has the CUI on your laptop, on your server, as Robert was saying, this all applies to you. You should be looking. So just like we, as GRC providers, are not regulated, we tell you how to do your system security, but we don't actually hold the data. And we shouldn't hold the data, right? Your GRC tool should not hold your CUI generally, but it should describe how you protect that CUI. And so as a law firm, you can help advise them on what the DFARS clause means. You can advise them what to do when you have a DFARS clause, but you don't actually have to handle that CUI, and you should probably find ways to avoid handling it and returning it, because it's actually a leak if it gets into your hands and you're not authorized to use it.
Absolutely, Mark.
All right. Ozzie, anything you'd like to share there?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. So I always get this question from customers, where does the line stop? What is CUI? Where is it? And I always tell folks, if you're a prime and you're working directly on a contract and then you have your DFAR 7012, you are actually not responsible, unless it's written in your contract, to mark things as CUI, which is only the case for things where the provider, the vendor, is creating CUI for the government. Now, if the government is sharing information down to the prime and then they're marking as CUI, they are the owner of that marking and that data. That's theirs. That's not yours. And so I always tell folks, think of the transaction on the business side to determine who is the owner of that data. And it's always going to be your customer on the government side. Now, if you're a law firm supporting a government contractor, that's a little different, right? If they're a sub or they're involved in the work statement that was issued by the government, then there's a high chance that they will be touching and dealing with that same data. However, from the question, I think the concept that was brought up or the examples mentioned were intellectual property needs and labor and employment. Those things, you want to ask yourself, who's the owner of that data? Is it the company or is it the government? If it's the company, then in theory, the law firm does not require any of those requirements, right? That's between them and their customer. So I just always tell folks, think about who is paying for it and who owns it, right? And that kind of should help paint a picture.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. All right. Let's see. We've got a specific one around. Do the GRC tools automatically update the documents? If they don't, how does a GRC tool help maintain documents? Is that still a manual process? And I know you gentlemen probably have different ways of attacking this, but can you give a generalized answer of what the solution might be? Let's go ahead. Back to you, Ozzie.
Sure. So I think all GRC tools have a way of referencing and relating artifacts like documentation to controls and frameworks and standards. Some tools may have a built-in document processing solution that could do versioning and editing and modifications, and then it may pair it with workflows such as approvals. There's different flavors out there, but at a minimum, and my suggestion is when you are looking into a GRC product, make sure you have the ability to collect evidence and artifacts at the right levels. In the CMMC case, it would be a one-to-one or a many-to-many relationship between CMMC assessment objectives and the evidence, right? So that's what I would say is minimum criteria.
Yep.
All right. Anything from you, Mark? Robert put his answer in writing, so we're going to go to you, Mark.
Very good. So I agree with what Ozzie was saying. We all have a way of handling it, and there is not a magic bullet that I've seen. So maybe the gentlemen on the call have some magic bullet in their tools, which I wouldn't know about, but it can't read your mind. And usually you have, so what you want to do is have the ability to cross-reference from one document to another. If you update it in one place, you're pointing to your updates in another place. And I think that there are ways that we've all worked that out, but there's not something that's going to magically somehow update the entire platform in a way that maintains readability. So it is an important concept. You need to be able to update a template and compare what you were doing last year with this year. And there are plenty of tips and tricks that are sort of inside these tools that will help you do that.
Okay. And Robert, since you typed yours out, do you have anything quickly to add, or you want to keep
Yeah,
it?
I think Mark and Ozzie, you're absolutely correct. Just to make sure that the tool manages it for you. And what we've seen the problems is when people are trying to manually do it. And Brian, the point I was making in my response was if you're updating your compliance in a spreadsheet and your SSP over in Word on SharePoint, the likelihood that those two are cohesive is slim to none. But if you have a tool where that data is going in, as Ozzie said, you're doing the evidence, you're doing the collection, as Mark said, you're doing that data, you're putting those details in, and then the tool generates that, you have the most recent. You're not going to SharePoint and pulling an old legacy document.
Right.
I will give you a couple of war stories. One is somebody goes into a GRC tool. I don't think it was ours, the way I heard the story, but they dropped links to all their documents on their server, and then somebody decided to have the server cleanup project and literally broke all the links, and it's time for the assessment, and they can't find all their documents other than doing sort of a search of their network. So be careful about linking. It's very tempting to link. The other thing is you often have one or two people who are working on policy and procedure in your company, and those become orphaned on the computers or on the private OneDrive folders of those people. So be careful about where this work product lives. Try to get people to work somewhere. You can have a draft folder inside of your policies area, whether it's in the tool or on your SharePoint. But if you start to distribute it too much, a lot of what the assessors are doing is they're looking for differences. They're looking for somebody on one side of the company to be following document A, and then the actual activity doesn't follow document A, or document B is different from document A. All these things are going to slow down and cost you a lot of money during the assessment, and ultimately they can lead to findings.
Yep. We've seen that too, Mark, in so many of the joint assessments where the documentation does not meet the as is.
But by the way, both could be adequate. But the problem is if there's a difference, that's still a finding. So you could say something happens every 30 days and the requirement is 15 days, and somewhere else it says 60 days. It doesn't matter that both are good enough. You've got a finding because that's really easy for them to find. There's a difference, right? And they're human beings. So that's an easy way for them to do their job. So be aware that that's their tactic. Mm-hmm. So be prepared for that tactic.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. So this one, I've read this one a couple times. It's deep water, and we'll see what we can do with it. If we can't adequately answer it here, we will definitely, I will get somebody that can. But I think hopefully between the four of us, we can figure this one out. So here we go. Anonymous. How are GRC tools providers dealing with the possibility of being scoped into a CMMC assessment boundary as a security protection asset by virtue of maintaining security protection data in their tools? Next two-part question, it looks like. Then would the information stored in GRC tools be considered SPD? Three-part question. Here we go. If so, how can this be mitigated, or is it accepted that GRC tools will inevitably be scoped in? This has been a discord I've seen on LinkedIn and a few other channels that I'm privy to with my experience, but there's I've seen multiple answers or solutions or thoughts, but I'm interested to see if you gentlemen want to take a swing at this.
I'll swing on this one first because we've been actively engaged in this with both the Cyber AB and with the DoD answering some of these questions, and even up to DIPCAC. This is a great question, and they're absolutely correct. And one of the decisions, and Mark and Ozzie, I'll speak for myself and let you guys speak to your tools because I know how we're handling this. We store operational data, not evidentiary evidence data. That doesn't mean you don't put the evidentiary data into the tool. We require the client to have a repository on their own solution, whether that's SharePoint, whether it's Dropbox, Gold Comet. Heck, if you don't have a repository, we partnered with Gold Comet to give you a repository that's FIPS compliant. But have a repository that meets the requirements. Tie that to the tool so all evidentiary evidence never leaves your environment. It never puts us in scope. All of that evidence stays on the OSC systems under their control. So it never becomes part of the GRC tool. Now, we do pull that data and generate reporting, but if that report contains that type data, it's stored back on the repository. So it's not able to be downloaded directly to their machine, to their laptop, to that end user device. It has to go to a designated repository, and their identity access management rules kick in as to who can now download that report, that potential SSP that contains a CUI or whatever that is. And then it becomes their liability as to who has access to that report location. But as far as the tool, we've been very clear on not adding that into the tool, but leaving it on the client site, just tying to it through APIs.
Okay, fair. Ozzie?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I would agree with the sentiment that, SPD is a relatively new term that is not in the NIST glossary. NIST has not defined it.
Right.
NIST talks around it and has a concept of security functioning solutions. There's a couple other acronyms out there in terms they're used. DoD in the proposed CMMC rule introduced the SPD concept, but CMMC historically introduced SPA, right, which is a security protection asset.
That's it.
So my understanding is that DoD basically took that similar relationship between a CUI data type and an asset handling it being a CUI asset, and then said, well, SPA doesn't have a data type designation, so we're going to propose one, call it SPD, but they failed to properly define it, of course. So now we have this huge confusion in the industry around what is SPD, what qualifies as SPD. And what I've been telling folks is, we've asked already, many people have asked the DoD to clarify, right? And hopefully they will eventually. But in the short term, make some assumptions, right? If the assumption from CMMC assessment guides was referring to security protection assets as either a service, a product, a solution, a capability that provides security functionality to meet controls to an asset handling CUI, then consider the data that product or that solution is handling is SPD. And so naturally, you can get to the conclusion that GRC would have SPD, right? Especially if it has copies of documentation like policies and procedures, or a way that you're describing your architecture diagrams and things like that. That could potentially be SPD, right? So in that context, I think that you'll notice most GRC vendors out there already have accreditations or are working on it. So like the commercial industry, SOC 2 is pretty common. In the DIB, there's this confusion around FedRAMP moderate requirements for SPD. That's not official and that's not set in stone, but for our approach to it, we actually are working on implementing FedRAMP moderate. And we always had that on our product roadmap anyways, for being able to drink our own Kool-Aid. For the frameworks we support, we want to be able to demonstrate some level of, similarity there, right, so that we have that parity between the two. So in my opinion, whether it's scoped or not, I do think you should scope GRC as a security protection asset if it supports the security program. And then relative to what requirements apply, that's still up in the air, right? And every vendor is going to have their own answer to that.
Yeah, well, it's been a contentious discussion out in the wild. I've seen it referenced in numerous threads, and as you said, until DoD formally, kind of tightens up that statements or the implications around these designations, it's really going to be an interpretive solution based on an individual, case by case basis, and how you feel about it and what your risk aversion is and things of that nature. So it's really important that you be mindful of that and do your research as well. And again, I think that goes back to, if you don't know and you need those resources, you've got to solicit consultative services that can help you, that are quality and that can point you in the right direction. And but the things that you gentlemen have shared so far is the right way to think about it. And Mark, I'll let you chime in on this one if you want, or we can keep it.
Well, I'll just let you know how we handle it, because it is a controversial topic. It's not resolved.
Yeah.
In March, when the rule came out and it didn't resolve it, which we were praying that it would resolve it. So many people, we just want to tell us what to do so we can do it, but they didn't do that. So like the others, we tell people you can't put CUI in future feed, and you shouldn't put any configuration data that could be regulated. then people nonetheless do it. So we're constantly searching for it. We did have a data incident where we found nuclear information in our software, and we had to declare an incident and get it off of there and work with the client on that. That said, we know that's going to happen. So our entire platform is stored in the AWS GovCloud, which is IL4, because we just want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with where their data is, because accidents happen. And the second thing is, when we didn't get direction in March, we immediately engaged a company to bring us to FedRAMP Moderate. We expect that journey. We're already listed on the marketplace, although it's not an authorization yet or an equivalency yet, but we're there. Yeah, right. We're there, and by around November, December, could be earlier, we will finish and we will have an attestation letter from a 3PAO of FedRAMP Moderate equivalency. We just want people to feel comfortable. So that's our attitude.
Absolutely. Okay. Basically, we're all doing interpretive dance right now, Brian, till we understand what that is.
Until we get the real rule in. I know I'm running from that question too, because it puts me in hot water as well. So just want to invite everybody. There's 42 participants. There's been 17 respondents on the poll. If you've got a few minutes while we're having this chat, we'd love to get your input, because there's a lot of good questions out there that we want to kind of get a baseline understanding of the participants here today. So just want to re-invite you to do that. I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm a small business owner, and I am an RP, and I am doing assessment preps as a company. What do you think I need to do for my company to be CMMC level 2, or are there other options? Most sole proprietorships don't have the resources to be level 2, but we still want to do business. Yeah, that's a challenge we're seeing in the marketplace, and a lot of, everybody's kind of feeling that pain. But I'll let these gentlemen speak, and I've got some thoughts on this too. So let's start with Mark this time.
As an RPO, you don't have a requirement to be CMMC level 2, but you should have the same attitude that we talked about with the law firm earlier. You don't get to receive the CUI, and you should not have regular and unhampered access to it as you're serving your client company. So part of the controls is going to make sure that doesn't happen. In terms of what you do for yourself, what I would recommend is that you do a CMMC level 2 self-attestation. These controls, there may be a lot of them, but they're not that hard. And they're the kind of things that everybody should be doing anyway. The only thing where it's really a challenge is you've got the FIPS, so your networking equipment's going to be a little bit more expensive. But beyond that, these are best practices for the most part, and you're just kind of documenting them. So I think you do have the money to do your own look in the mirror and document that. And you can write a one-page letter that you can give to your clients explaining what you've done and why. And I think that should be sufficient and also affordable. But it's not doing nothing. I don't think you just say, oh, well, we're too small, so we don't have to worry about cybersecurity or CMMC. You should be eating your own dog food if you're giving advice.
Absolutely.
All right. Ozzie, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my advice is the same that I would give the small businesses in the supply chain, which is look at your revenue source from the defense industrial base to decide if it's worth investing in, and then looking at the options and exploring the solutions, right? Because, I mean, we've had small business customers that they were like less than 5% of their revenue is defense-based, right? And so they were like, get out of the business, right?
You're so right, Ozzie. This should have come up in the MSP question. MSPs have a decision to make as well. Like, is it really worth all that?
Yep, exactly. And for the RP, the question about you're providing services to help an OSC get ready, I think it depends on exactly what that service is, right? If you're talking MSP, MSSP type functionality of continuous monitoring and management of things, then, there's a different approach to that. If you're just simply a one-time consultant going in and out, the couple of options that I've put out there through experience has been, if it's, especially for like a sole proprietor, you could essentially support customers in a consulting capacity by using their equipment and their environments. Use their laptops, use their SharePoint, and use their emails. Now it's still in their scope. You're just a warm body providing labor, right? We do the same exact technique when on federal contracts, where we'll ask the government to furnish our government furnished equipment, GFEs, laptops, to do the work so that we can avoid scope creep in our own personal corporate environments. So that's one strategy. The other is simply, creating small cloud first, cloud only enclave type approach solution, get a GCC tenant or GCC high, and then, get yourself one mailbox, one laptop, and you could do that as well, right? I think it really depends on how it is you provide the services, and then how in depth is your connection to the data that your customers need you to touch and deal with, right? So think of it that way, and then, gauge your risk appetite.
Yeah, excellent. Robert?
I think this question is asked too soon in a lot of cases. And I say that because to agree with both Mark and Ozzie, companies have to decide if the cost of doing business with the DoD is worth the cost of implementing and achieving CMMC. We have been asked this question by so many small, like yourself, an RP, and they're a sole proprietor. Guys, do a like Ozzie said, look in the mirror, do a self-assessment first. Understand where your gaps are, understand where your score is. If you've got a negative 203 and you're having to start from scratch, you know it's going to be very expensive. If you've got an 80 and you've got just a few things to do, you can make a different decision. So until you have the place of knowledge so that you're making business decisions based on true understanding of your environment, the scope, and where you are today, sometimes these questions are asked a little bit early and there's not enough detail or data to make a decision, if that makes sense.
I agree with you. I think it would be really healthy to do that self-assessment, go through the controls for yourself, but have another column when you're doing it and think about what your shared responsibility matrix. So when you're dealing with a client, which of those controls is in the services that you're choosing to offer are going to be involved in the client relationship. Now you would have enough visibility into the information. You can plan your business properly. And then you can ask the question, is it worth it? How much more am I going to charge to be a mission critical MSP or mission critical consultant versus one that deals with the commercial sector?
All good points, gentlemen, all good points. And yes, one tactic that could be utilized it can be a little bit costly, but it should be, again, measured against the revenue opportunities and things of that nature, is to get involved with CMMC professional course, get your CCP licensure, and then you've got the knowledge and the experience, and then you can do the right things necessary to build your RP business or your consulting business into being compliant and be mindful of those solutions. You'll have the education necessary to basically having the tools that you can make good decisions. A quick side story: I've been doing this for quite a while, and I had a client that I met with and was trying to evaluate their readiness and their in information, and in the course of the conversation I said, well, what's your revenue? And he got a little defensive about it, and I said, I need to know what your revenue and what your part of your revenue is, DoD contracts or from the government. And then the first thing out of his mouth is, you would do that so you can charge me more? You want to know how much I make so you can charge me more? And I said, absolutely not. I said, what I'm trying to establish is if it's worth it, because I know what it's going to cost you just by the size of your operation. I have a rough number in my head of what the cost of doing business to become CMMC level 2 compliant is. And if it's not, juice isn't worth the squeeze, and we can stop this conversation, and I can help advise you in other ways of how to exit and how to offload and how to maybe make some strategic moves to be less in that space as opposed to being more in that space. And those are the types of discussions that need to be had. And as for yourself, you've got to educate yourself and make sure you're the expert in the room so that you can give that type of advice to any potential clients you have in the future. And the one way to do that is to be really educated on CMMC and costing associated and really knowing the marketplace. So I would, and I welcome an invitation, or reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to follow up on this conversation. But I think that's probably the best we can do with that one right now.
Brian, I've had many conversations when people call to get a subscription to Future Feed, and I start to interview them a little bit and try to gauge just how much they understand or know about CMMC. And more than once, we've resolved that maybe they're not ready to be talking to us yet, and come back later if you still want to be involved. And we spend we actually have a director of education. We spend a lot of time trying to educate the people that call us, and I think that conversation is very familiar. I don't usually go by sales size, but it's more about the understanding of what they're getting into. And I would guess that Robert and Ozzie, you've had similar experiences, because the last thing that I want to do is sell a subscription to someone who then is going to not use it and get frustrated and all of that. So I think that part of our job is to not sell sometimes,
Right.
and make sure that people are really ready.
Well, that's a premise of this webinar series. It's educational, trying to educate people to save them from themselves, or maybe give them opportunity to not make an expensive decision. Not necessarily that it's a bad decision, but an expensive decision if it's not necessary. So that's kind of where the thought process there. Did you have something else to add, Robert? I'm going to jump to another question here.
No, we're good. I agree with
Okay.
Mark. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not
So
always an easy conversation to have.
Right. Well, gentlemen, I'm looking for three specific points you would provide as advice to an OSC or an OSA. And for those of you who don't know, that's organization seeking certification or organization seeking assessment, to prepare and ensure a smooth assessment. So top three, one each, please. Let's start with Robert.
I'm writing down the question so I didn't forget it if I wasn't the first one. Okay. Yeah, this old brain of mine. I have the beard and the gray hair, but it also means I have the lack of memory. So, I guess the biggest thing, and Ozzie, you and Mark can get deeper, but I'm going to kind of go high level. Have a plan. Understand what your goal is. And we get to so many that they don't have a plan. They don't understand. They haven't self-educated, and they start asking questions. And you're going, have you had a business decision? Is this something that you actually want to pursue? You've known about this since 2017. You've been attesting it for the last 6 years. Are you now all of a sudden deciding you don't want to do this? Those are the discussions that I sit back going, have a plan, understand what you're getting into, and then know how you're going to maintain that for the future. And what we first started this out, Mark, you too. We resemble that. So Mark's saying, please repost the question because he's forgetting too. And that's exactly right. It's to understand what the journey is going to be and how you're going to maintain that for 36 months. So if you don't have a 3 and 5 year plan for your business and it doesn't already include the certification for 3-year maintaining it, you got to back up and start asking different questions. So I think the first thing at a 50,000 foot level is to know thine own self. Know what you're doing, know your business plan, know your business model, and know that you want to not only pursue this, but maintain it for at least that 36 months into the future.
Okay. I'm testing my typing skills. Well, I think you'll get the gist of it. I made a couple typos there. So it's smooth assessment is the last 2 words that's supposed to be there, but I apologize for my fat fingers. Ozzie, I'll let you go next because Mark said he wanted a chance to reread the question. So what are 3, I said 3, but 1 from each is the ideal points you would provide advice to OSC to prepare and ensure a smooth assessment. So what can they do in your mind to make sure that it's a smooth assessment?
Yeah, sure. So I've actually had the opportunity to sit in on several DIBCACs and joint surveillance assessments. And there's a strategy that we always recommend that I felt was the most powerful in terms of prepping for a smooth assessment, which was simply putting together, kind of like what Robert was saying, a plan, but more specifically what we call an evidence plan, right? So for example, if you had an evidence plan, imagine a spreadsheet with 320 rows, one for each assessment objective. You would want to essentially identify the files and artifacts you're providing for each of those objectives, and that many-to-many relationship. And then if it's something that needs to be demonstrated through a demo to the assessor during the assessment week, a lot of folks will skip out on the evidence, right, for that, right? Because they're like, I'm going to show them anyways. I actually recommend capturing evidence for it anyways. And if it's a demo, typing up in a simple bullet list narrative on how you would do that. This individual will click here, go here, open this, and show this screen, and then rehearse it. And then on assessment day, there's no mistakes. There's no confusion of who's showing what, who's demoing exactly what. And you're able to, more importantly, control the narrative of the storytelling that you are telling your assessors. Because what you don't want is for them to start picking and poking holes at things and going down a rabbit hole and mistakenly uncovering something that you even weren't aware of. So if you want a smooth assessment, depict the narrative and the story ahead of time and stick to the story as much as possible.
Control the story.
Amen.
Control the narrative, huh? Okay. All right, Mark, you have something to add?
I had 3 because I thought that's the way the question was being asked, but I'll go very quickly.
Mark's an overachiever today, guys.
Now he's overachieving. Great.
So one piece of advice is find somebody who's a certified assessor, who either a C3PO or who works for one, and just do 10 controls with them first. We all look good in our own mirror. My hair doesn't look so gray in my own mirror. Your IT is not going to look. Your IT will look more secure and more perfect, and your evidence better when you're only looking at it yourself. So get some outside eyes on it. That's number 1. Number 2, when you're prepping, exactly what Ozzie was saying, you don't want wandering questions and wandering eyes. Know who they're going to talk to or who you recommend. They can ask to talk to anybody, but who do you recommend that they talk to, and what evidence are they going to see on each and every control? Because what you don't want is for them wandering through your network or tapping people on the shoulder in the hallway, for goodness sake, and asking them questions, because people are naturally helpful, and it turns out naturally helpful people often don't have accurate answers. And then the last thing is document. So the culture change that really is at the core of CMMC, talk to your company, talk to all of the people in your company. They are used to having a meeting and doing their job. So if they're supposed to review something, I think in most companies, if you assign an employee to review whatever it is, a policy, a procedure, a tool, it doesn't matter what it is, they actually do their jobs. The difference is, under the magnifying glass of CMMC, you need to have a record that they actually did it. So if I'm looking at my travel policy that I've been using for the last 10 years, I got to say, it's not that exciting to look at that policy and review it every single year. But if your overarching policy says you're going to review your policies once a year, the big culture change is to take a note somewhere and have it available that you actually did it, because you can't get out of it. If you say that you're going to review your firewall policy, let's do a more important one, once a year, and you don't have some sort of evidence that you actually did it, whether you changed it or not is not important. The fact is, hopefully you do change it if you see a flaw in it, but obviously, even if you see no flaws, a one sentence, the policy was reviewed on July 25th at 2:52 p.m., and we see no changes for 2025, that's evidence. But nobody really operates that way in the real world until now. So that's the part that you really need to communicate to your team and to your organization, if you're in a leadership position, that this is the big change that's happening, is we need evidence.
Yeah, the best advice I can chime in with that as well is that your policies and procedures and your activities need to be written in a way that anyone on your staff, whether the primary or the secondary person in charge of those policies, procedures, activities, whatever they are in the compliance modules at the 320, anyone that's tasked with that can take that instruction and deliver the results, the screenshot, the evidence you grab, the behavior answers. Those are critical. And what you don't want to do in an audit or in an assessment is to get blindsided by Jim is sick today, and Bill and Dave and Sue have no idea what Jim does. And that's going to be to the detriment of you, because you're an organization that's trying to prove that you have healthy cybersecurity hygiene and habits. And the only way that you can do that properly is being ready with your backups and your people and your personnel. And that's why a lot of times people look at this as an IT problem. And I think these gentlemen will agree. While it is heavily oriented in cybersecurity and IT, it's an organizational change. And it's OCM is necessary, organizational change management, and it has to be throughout the organization. Behaviors have to be monitored and modified, and the work habits have to be adopted in order for you to be compliant, because it's not good enough for the IT department to put a bunch of controls together that nobody follows and nobody's adhering to, and it's just you're gonna end up in an absolute failure at that point. If the organization is not taking on the changes, it's going to be to your detriment. So I want to point out
one thing I was going to add.
Go ahead,
I was just going to add, Brian, something ironic that I've noticed in the industry, even with the DIB companies, is they've done such a great job at building and scaling a business, but they don't apply the same methodologies and lessons learned to a cybersecurity compliance program, right? Yeah. It's exactly what you said. It's OCM, right? can you build a well-oiled machine such that you can walk away and go spin up another business, right, to increase your income, right? Just like how business-minded people think, right? It's the same exact logic for cybersecurity. Yeah. Can you walk away and will it still work, right? And that's what you should design for.
And we should tie this back to GRC tools. Just to say it out loud, the GRC tool you pick, if you're going to be doing things like the examples that I made of documenting that you've done a review, you've got a lot of little bits of detail that have to be captured, which is why a spreadsheet doesn't work. But your GRC tool, there are many GRC tools. We're just this little subset, 3 of us on this call. But one of the features that you're looking for is how are many people in my organization going to get that information into a place where the assessor can see it? That's what the GRC is there for. And frankly, you need a tool because you're not going to do it. You're not going to pass and have all this information scattered all over your network and all of your computers. Or it's unlikely that you'll pass. And it is likely that you will spend a lot more money because you're going to be really slow finding the information when the questions are asked.
Sure. So I want to point out it's 1:55. We got 5 minutes. I want to thank everybody's participation. We're going to take one more question here, but I want to invite you before you go. There's an exit poll. We'd like to get your feedback. It's 3 short questions. They're not that tricky, but we'd love to have your feedback because we want to continue to evolve and get better at this and to give you guys, folks out there, what you need. So the last question, and I'll throw this to the group and let's try to be mindful. We got 4 minutes. So do you believe CMMC program will hit any limitation or bottlenecks considering the demand versus supply of see-through POs? And let's just go for it. Robert?
Absolutely. I believe that there's definitely going to be a bottleneck. I think we're going to see people are saying, well, they're just going to put extensions. They're just going to let people not do it. I don't think that's going to happen at all. I don't think the DoD is going to back down. I think there's going to be bottlenecks, but I don't think, and I could be wrong. This is my opinion. You asked for an opinion. I really think they're going to stick to their guns, and we're going to have to ramp up the ability to support the DIB, and the DoD is not going to change. Is there going to be a bottleneck? Yes. We just have to come up with solutions to solve it.
Well, it creates its own urgency, right? We know that there's going to be challenges. If you want to get ahead of this and be proactive and get yourself in the best position to be successful in the near term, you need to be involved now, and that's a creative urgency that's kind of out there. I don't think we can sit back and wait for, a hall pass for an extension and things of that nature. So I totally agree.
Unless 2017.
Yeah, you've been accountable for, since 2017, and people kind of gloss over that or have amnesia about the fact that they've been signing paperwork and documentation saying that they're doing these things for about 7 years now. So
exactly.
I want to give everybody a chance to sign off appropriately. If you feel like you need to answer the question, you're welcome to, but I'm going to go around the horn and just, Brian Rhodes, iFortress, thank you for being here. CMMC webinar, CMMC Coalition webinar series. We're happy to have you. We're going to be doing another one next month. Keep an eye out for the advertisement. I'm going to let Mark start off with a wrap up here.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. I do think there's going to be a bottleneck. I think you should start thinking about things like doing a self-attestation and preparing some sort of document that has some meat on the bone to be substitutable in case it takes a few months or half a year to get your actual assessment. At least if you wait and you count on that, it's at your own peril. But if you're prepared and the only thing you're waiting for is the inspection, you've got something meaty to share, you may still be doing business. Nobody's going to say that officially, but I believe that there's going to always be a need to buy. And if you've got something to sell, give them a reason why they can still buy from you if the supply and demand doesn't let you get inspected.
It really
anyway, thanks for the chance. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate Robert and Ozzie coming here and allowing us to all talk together. It's very nice.
Yeah, and Ozzie, you want to wrap up for yourself?
Sure. Just want to say thank you to everyone. One last tidbit I was going to say, I do remain extremely hopeful for the overall CMMC rollout. This is the first time I've seen an industry come together and help each other as much as I've seen in the last few years. Case in point, the 3 of us on this panelist are competitors, but we're also friends, right? I've never seen that in any other industry. And so I will say, there are great people in this community. Take advantage of them, meet them, get out there and try to introduce yourself because everyone's willing to help.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And make sure they're wearing a good beard when you interact with them. I mean, the three of us obviously are.
Bring us home, Robert. All right, so Robert, thank you. We're right up against the time. We want to say special thanks to the gentleman for participating. I want to shout out to the participants. Feel free to reach out to us all on LinkedIn. You see our names spelled here. I believe they're all accurate. So if you look us up on LinkedIn, you can make a connection and get some further answers to any of your questions you might have. And it's been a great time today. I really, really appreciate you, Mark, Robert, Ozzie. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to wrap here, and we'll see you in the funny papers.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's a pleasure.
Take care.
Bye-bye.